They don't even bother denying it. Operation Mockingbird was not a rumor, not a theory, and not a fringe accusation. It was a documented intelligence operation of the United States government. It began in the early Cold War, long before most Americans ever imagined their own news could be quietly shaped by the same agency that ran covert actions around the world. The CIA did not deny its existence once it was exposed. And although the agency later claimed the program ended, the record shows it once used journalists, publishers, media executives, writers, and cultural figures to influence public perception. This is not speculation. It comes from declassified materials, sworn testimony, and investigations that entered the congressional record. People may choose to ignore it, but they cannot erase it. This was a very successful operation. In the late 1940s and early 1950s, the CIA faced what it believed was an invisible battleground: the minds of the public. Governments could be shaped with guns and bombs, but public opinion could be shaped with newspapers, radio, magazines, and television. If the Soviet Union or its allies spread propaganda, the CIA believed America needed its own weapon to counter it. The United States didn't build a news network of its own. It simply learned how to quietly guide the ones that already existed. Inside the CIA, covert media operations were placed under the Office of Policy Coordination, and Frank Wisner, one of the most influential intelligence officers of his era, began building a network of trusted contacts across the press. Former intelligence officers later described how Wisner referred to this network as a mighty Wurlitzer, a jukebox of dependable journalistic voices who could play whatever tune was needed. The phrase did not come from conspiracy theorists. It was documented in books written by former officers and researchers, including works by Deborah Davis, Hugh Wilford, and Francis Stoner Saunders, all of whom based their writing on records and testimony from the period. Wisner's operation did not rely on threats. It relied on access, persuasion, money, ideology, patriotism, and relationships. The CIA approached people who already held influence in major newsrooms, and those people agreed to cooperate, believing they were helping protect the country during an era of intense geopolitical fear. Evidence uncovered decades later showed that certain journalists were paid. Others were recruited. Some offered information while abroad, allowing the CIA to track political changes in foreign countries. Others agreed to publish stories written or influenced by the agency. The point was not to control the entire news ecosystem. The point was to insert quiet influence at key moments, in key places, through voices the public already trusted. None of this came to public light during the early Cold War. It was not discussed in newspapers, and it was not admitted by the government. For decades, the CIA repeatedly avoided questions about domestic media influence. But when the Senate's Church Committee began investigating intelligence abuses in the 1970s, the truth emerged. For the first time, U.S. senators directly examined how intelligence agencies operated inside the borders of the United States, and they found evidence that shocked even seasoned lawmakers. Testimony and documents revealed that American journalists had secretly worked with the CIA, some knowingly, some quietly, some without understanding how the information they received was being shaped. The Church Committee discovered that the CIA funded front organizations' fake foundations, publishing houses, cultural groups, and news agencies. The money looked private, but it came from the government. These fronts produced articles, magazines, radio broadcasts, academic conferences, and books that supported American foreign policy goals. The committee's findings revealed that the CIA had cultivated relationships with reporters and editors in major news organizations. It did not say every reporter was involved. It did not say every newspaper was compromised. But it confirmed the program existed, and it confirmed the CIA had influence inside American media. Investigative journalist Carl Bernstein later conducted his own independent investigation, published in 1977. Drawing from interviews with former CIA personnel and information uncovered during the Church Committee, Bernstein reported that more than 400 journalists had, in some capacity, worked with the CIA during the Cold War. Some provided information, some served as go-betweens. Some wrote stories that defended American interests abroad. Some helped the agency gather intelligence while traveling overseas. Bernstein named major outlets whose executives maintained close relationships with intelligence officials. These included individuals connected to the Washington Post, Time, Life, CBS, ABC, Newsweek, and others. Bernstein did not say these companies signed formal contracts with the CIA. Instead, he reported that key individuals within those organizations cooperated, sometimes enthusiastically. Nothing in this information relied on secret rumor. It was part of the historical record. Yet the average American never heard about it. Schools did not teach it. Newspapers rarely revisited it. Even the Church Committee's findings were overshadowed by other revelations about assassination plots and foreign coups. Operation Mockingbird, despite being proven real, faded quietly from memory. And perhaps that was the point. What better sign of successful propaganda than a public that forgets it ever existed? Critics sometimes argue that the CIA only used media influence in foreign countries. But the Church Committee's documents and testimony explicitly acknowledge domestic relationships. The CIA claimed these relationships were limited, carefully managed, and used only for national security. Yet even that admission proves the core fact. The agency did it. And if it could be done once, the question becomes, why would it ever be abandoned? The CIA stated the program ended in the 1970s after public exposure and criticism. But intelligence agencies rarely give up tools that work. They evolve them, they rename them, they move them into new departments, they replace one method with another. During the Cold War, news traveled slowly through newspapers, magazines, and 3 television networks. Today, information spreads through digital platforms that can reach billions of people instantly. Algorithms decide what rises and what disappears. Search engines decide what people find and what they don't. Content moderation decides which claims are amplified and which are labeled as unreliable. A modern intelligence agency would not need to recruit 400 journalists. It would only need influence over a handful of platforms. It would only need access to data, trends, and recommendations. It would only need partnerships that shape which stories are allowed to gain traction. This does not require a conspiracy. It requires access. The same access intelligence agencies have always sought. Contracts, leaks, selective disclosures, anonymous briefings, and classified background information given to reporters can guide public perception without a single fake article ever being printed. Modern media does not need to be controlled directly. It can be guided, incentivized, rewarded, steered, and shaped. And when that happens, the result looks voluntary, not coerced. It looks like journalism, not propaganda. Some people assume propaganda requires a dictator controlling the press. In reality, propaganda thrives best when the public believes the press is free. If readers trust the news, their guard is down. If viewers believe journalists are independent, they do not question where their information comes from. Influence is most effective when invisible. Operation Mockingbird was not loud. It was quiet. It did not censor every viewpoint. It elevated the ones that served its purpose. It did not need to control every reporter. It needed only the right ones. And those relationships were proven to exist. There is another layer that history tends to forget: cultural influence. According to declassified programs like the Congress for Cultural Freedom, the CIA funded writers, academics, musicians, artists, filmmakers, and publishers to promote ideologies aligned with U.S. interests. Books were promoted, others discouraged. Films received funding, others were quietly opposed. The goal was not to brainwash the public. The goal was to steer intellectual culture away from communism and toward a worldview favorable to American power. It worked. It worked so well that Western culture absorbed it without noticing. Once the Church Committee exposed the media connections, the CIA defended itself by saying times had changed. They insisted oversight would prevent future abuse. They said cooperation with journalists was being phased out. And maybe some of that was true. But history offers a warning. Governments do not give up influence willingly. They adapt. They find new channels. They update old strategies. If Operation Mockingbird was designed for newspapers, radio, and television, what would a modern equivalent look like? It would not need to buy printing presses or recruit anchormen. It would only need influence over algorithms, platforms, search rankings, and content policies. It would only need partnerships that shape which viewpoints appear authoritative and which are dismissed. Instead of ghostwritten articles, it could rely on anonymous officials quoted in headlines. Instead of direct payments, it could use access as currency. Instead of censorship, it could bury stories beneath a flood of noise. Propaganda no longer needs to silence a message. It only needs to drown it. This is not an accusation that the CIA is currently running Mockingbird under a different name. The script does not claim that. It does not name any current journalist, network, or platform as compromised. It simply observes a documented truth. Intelligence agencies once did this. They admitted it only after investigations forced transparency. And if the tool was effective then, why would any government abandon the ability to shape public perception now? Intelligence agencies are not built to surrender advantages. They are built to expand them. When technology changes, their methods change. When new media appears, they study it. When new platforms emerge, they learn how to use them. It is not illegal for the government to communicate with media. It is not illegal to influence public opinion. The line only becomes visible when secrecy is involved. And secrecy is the oxygen of intelligence work. If the CIA ever wanted to guide narratives today, it would be easier than in the 1950s. It would require fewer people, less money, and almost no paper trail. It would not need 400 journalists. It would only need a handful of decision makers in the right places. And the public would never know, because the public would have no way to detect it. When influence is indirect, decentralized, and digital, it leaves no fingerprints. This is the legacy of Operation Mockingbird. Once the public understands that media can be influenced, the question is no longer whether it happened. The question is how often it happens without being exposed. History shows that democracies sometimes hide their propaganda behind the appearance of free press. History shows that patriotic cooperation can blur into manipulation. History shows that the most effective propaganda does not look like propaganda at all. It looks like journalism. It looks like information. It looks like truth. Operation Mockingbird happened. It was documented. It was investigated. It was partially admitted. It is part of U.S. history. And knowing that, every citizen is left with a question no government can answer for them. If a government once used the media to shape what the public believed, how certain can anyone be that it would never happen again? Because the greatest power of propaganda is not controlling what people think. It is controlling what they never knew existed.